It's like a punchline to a bad joke. Just how bad are the Democrats doing? So bad that even former Democratic strategists are mocking them, including former Biden White House press secretary and current MSNBC host Jen Psaki, who had this to say about her party on her podcast. Let's watch.
So one of the things, and this is, I always laugh when people call me a Washington insider, which maybe I am, but because I feel like I grew up in politics, like working on political campaigns. And which drives me crazy is the way sometimes Democrats talk. It drives me insane. It's like we're in a PhD thesis on political academia, which is not how you win elections. You said, it's like so funny because I wrote it down. Democrats talk like we are adjunct professors at a small liberal arts college of the Midwest, which I'm sure I would love a small liberal arts college of the Midwest, but like, that's not how most people talk. And I've noticed this since even hosting a show. Like I'll have people on and you're like, are you reading from a sheet of talking point? I'm asking you about the threat to our country of this and you're talking about something else.
Former Biden ambassador to Japan and current CNN political commentator Rahm Emanuel agreed with Jen Psaki. Let's watch.
There's a way of using terminology, but you're right. A lot of people, Democrats, we love people to know that we're smart and that we got our PhD and here we're ready to show you our thesis. And it comes across not only that it's a self-enclosed conversation, it is tremendously dismissive of them, the audience. We're actually talking to ourselves about how important, how smart we are, rather than how to make sure that they understand. We're more interested in the sound of our own voice.
And the Young Turks host Anna Kasparian had this to say on Friday about the Democratic Party. Let's watch.
Listen, no one is stupid enough to think that Democrats have a modicum of power right now. They don't. They have no power right now. We all understand that. But how about take a look at the behavior of Republicans when they are not in power? You want to know what they do? They don't shut up. Okay, they're doing press conferences. They're doing congressional hearings. They're repetitive. Again and again, the Hillary Benghazi thing. Every single day, Hillary Benghazi, Hillary Benghazi, Hillary Benghazi. Democrats though, they cower. They cower and then they tell their own supporters, shut up. There's nothing we can do because we don't have enough power. And then what they'll say is, we need to have control of Congress. And then everyone will get out the vote, they'll organize, they'll canvass, they'll fight real hard to ensure Democrats have the majority in Congress in both the lower chamber, Senate. And guess what they do with that power? Nothing. That's what Biden had. And then it was excuse after excuse after excuse for why they can't get their own agenda accomplished.
Well, Lynda, you're a Democratic insider as well. Are you
Am
not?
I? I was also a campaigner. Thank you very much, Jen Psaki.
Jen Psaki was White House press secretary. She's like, oh, I guess I'm a Washington insider. I think you're an insider, babe.
I think you got a point there, Robby.
This happens all the time, though. I listen to Democratic political figures concede that their party is out of touch with working class people. There's almost a trope at this point. We hear this all the time. There's endless discussion of it, admission of it. It'd be weirder, frankly, to hear a Democrat say there's no problem with the way we talk down to people. They're always saying there is clearly a communications problem with how we reach out to ordinary people and that our cultural predilections or progressive social cultural values are in some way toxic or off-putting to ordinary folks. That is, I think, well established, but then that is never operationalized into an actual new strategy.
You know what I think the fundamental problem is, and I feel like I can say this as the Democrat sitting at the table. Yeah. I think the problem is we all agree that Democrats failed to connect with working people, working families this last cycle, and probably the last several, if we're being really honest with ourselves. The problem is the leaders of the party typically say, yeah, it's everybody else that's doing that, it's not me. And so candidly, this is what I've been saying to folks on my team, which is that we all have to be doing a better job of listening, and we also have to be honest with ourselves about where we individually have failed to meet the moment. And then I think at that point, you can move on. There's one thing I will say, though. I do not agree with Anna Kasparian that Democrats are throwing up their hands and saying there's nothing we can do, we're not in power. Clearly the deck is stacked against us. But what I hear Democrats saying is you have the power. You as citizens have the power. You need to be out protesting. You need to be out organizing in your own communities and talking to your members of Congress, be they Democrats or Republicans, about what you actually need and care about.
But there's not... Okay, but you have to concede there's not very much protesting going on right now. There's not, compared to the first Trump administration, there's not millions of people in the streets. I mean, I suspect that's the case because they remember doing that the first time and it having very little effect on the trajectory of the Trump administration. I think there is more just resignation to, okay, it's Trump won, it's his term to do whatever he wants. I'm not hearing again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not privy to these meetings. I'm certainly not hearing much of a strategy from Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi. Maybe there's more of a plan among activist groups or communications firm. I saw, was it The Atlantic or Semaphore? I think it was The Atlantic. Maybe it was covered in Semaphore, but it was The Atlantic, hosting a kind of Democratic strategy session with like podcasters to help explain to Democrats how to communicate better or compete in the environment that Republicans and Trump have been so successful in, the kind of podcast milieu. That was just taking place I think last week or something like that. That suggests to me that they're still trying to find the answer to how to communicate with people better.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two different debates going on here and two very important ones. One is about overall message, overall mission, values of the party, and how to connect with voters. That's one discussion. The other discussion, which I think is more what's happening here with the podcasts and what you're describing, is how does the Democratic Party combat what it sees as the massive Republican conservative media infrastructure, which includes everything from Fox News to the Joe Rogans of the world and many other content creators, which is an entirely, I think, steeper hill to climb for Democrats. I think all of this is very important, but doesn't get away from the fact that there still needs to be a different kind of movement, a different kind of policy set to connect with people. The last thing I'll say is that in the first round of Trump, you saw the resistance because it was organic, and I think it was really about two things: a reaction to the man, which I think feels personal, and also that it felt like the election was stolen that go around. I think this time Democrats are trying to be more strategic, more thoughtful. You're seeing a lot of legal strategery, as it were, for example, and I think it requires that in this moment.
I mean, the content creator set of people moving to the right and becoming much more favorable to Trump or being a successful vehicle for Trumpism, that is an organic phenomenon in and of itself, right? There was always Fox News, there was always conservative media organizations, but so much of this veering in a right direction is just I think a mix of people genuinely coming to hold those views of the content creators themselves, finding audiences that are receptive to those views, and then maybe modifying or leaning more in that direction. It is fascinating, but I do think it even if there's an acknowledgement, as I kind of said earlier, of that they've been talking to people the wrong way, there's not a willingness enough to actually change. Like I was listening to Ken Martin, the new head of the DNC, being interviewed on MSNBC sometime in the last 48 hours. Everything is blending together lately, and they asked him.
Long day.
Yeah. Oh, tell me about it. And they showed him a poll of where the American public was at on there only being two genders listed on government documents, and majority of the public clearly agrees with that. That that's a Trump initiative to make the government forms just say man or woman, and it has massive public support. And they asked Ken Martin about that, and he immediately pivoted to, well, voters are so concerned about inflation, and Trump promised to do something about it, but he's going to make inflation worse, and he's not doing it. And they're like, okay, but you didn't answer the question. We showed you a poll saying most of the American people disagree with the progressive left on this issue. Is that a problem? And he was like, well, I don't decide what goes on the... he's still not addressing it. He could just say, yeah, we should abandon that position because it's unpopular with the American people. Or he could say, I don't care that the American people feel that way because what's right is right and they're wrong about that and we're going to continue to advocate for it, but he's just ignoring it.
Right. I mean, I think what he's trying to do, I didn't see this interview obviously, but I think what he's trying to do is focus on the big picture, the price of eggs, the impact of the current economy on people's kitchen table discussions and their wallets, which I think is generally, by the way, good advice for both sides of the party.
Well, I don't know. I think focusing on what the government gender IDs say is good for the Republican Party, in addition to, yes, of course, talking about kitchen table issues, which Trump did, the price of eggs and food and all that. We still hope that is going to be addressed with some sane economic policies. Next up on the show, left-wing pundit Mehdi Hasan and Vice President J.D. Vance got into a spat on X. We're going to discuss. Stay tuned.